mess it up kind of go away. Even like I've just walked on top of a canvas and gotten footprints on it, or like spilled something accidentally, and then suddenly it's not so precious.
Welcome to Color Me Crazy, the podcast where we dive into the world of art and creativity. I'm your host, Akai, a multidisciplinary artist. Today, we're chatting with an amazing creator, an amazing artist. I'm thrilled to interview Eleanor Shapiro, a mixed media painter from the US, now based in Amsterdam. Eleanor's work explores the complexity of human emotions. She has had multiple exhibitions and residencies worldwide. Eleanor, thank you so much for being here with us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's going to be fun.
Yes, I can't wait to keep the snowball effect of this amazing conversation that we're going to have. And for context for the audience, Eleanor and me, we met in an art residency in Berlin, and we were sharing the same studio. And I feel like, Eleanor, you have so much drive and like so much passion. Like it's so inspiring. I feel like you touched my heart so much in the studio and like amazing conversations that we had in the studio and like your creative process and all of this. And I really wanted to invite you to the podcast and have these conversations, you know, out there. So yeah, first of all, I want to know a little bit about your story. How did you end up, you know, going to this artistic journey and stuff?
I don't actually have such a good story for that. The way I always explain it is the way that most parents are with academics. My parents are more with art. So, you know, I think I started at my first art class at the LA County Museum when I was like 3 years old. And my dad and I would go to the museum or a museum almost every weekend growing up. And it wasn't pressure because I loved it. But my family's very into the arts, particularly visual art. So it was always very encouraged. And I'm just lucky that I really liked it and I really enjoyed sort of all things art instead of like, you know, my parents being like, you need to be a doctor, and me being like, no, I don't want that. So from day one, basically.
Yeah, definitely. What did you study? I don't remember.
It's actually kind of funny because I went to a state university and I did major in art, but I didn't graduate. I did drop out.
Nice. But that's nice. I feel like also a self-taught artist and just like being in the studio and producing, it's like literally what you have to do, you know, like to push as an artist also, I feel like. What's your experience?
I mean, yeah, it's funny because when I was in university, not to say I knew everything that they were trying to teach me, but I kind of did know everything that they were trying to teach me. But I was young, you know, I think I was like 18 or 19 when I dropped out, and I had pretty good technical experience, but I was so young, I don't feel like I particularly had an artistic voice yet. Because you don't know anything when you're 18. You don't really know who you are. You're figuring that out. And I suppose there are exceptions to that rule. But for me, I could paint well, but I didn't really have anything to paint about or hadn't figured out how to paint about my life yet. And so the reason I dropped out was because I went to an art residency in France, and then I went to Chateau Orcovo art residency in France, and then ended up being hired there as the associate director. And I was basically like, well, should I stay and finish school, or should I go and live in France and see what happens? Decided to go and see what would happen because school will always be there. And then I never went back, and that helped me figure out what my practice was and have a studio that wasn't my parents' garage.
That's so interesting. Like, I know when I met you, you were traveling. How does traveling really impacted your art and like your creative process, you know, getting to know all these cultures, getting out of the US, you know, out of your hometown?
Getting out of my hometown was the best. That was like the first amazing thing that happened for my artistic voice, was sort of going off into the world and finding myself and doing my own thing. The traveling was rough because I feel like I had really I settled into having my own studio and my own practice and having all my materials around me. And then when you're backpacking across the globe, finding art materials is not so easy, and you're trying to travel light. So you only have, I did have an extra suitcase with like a portable studio. And that was great. It really helped me. Like, my sketchbook became my studio. But after a while, I had this just like gnawing itch of like, I need some stability. I need to be able to have my materials, and, you know, my watercolors like got moldy in the Amazon. So I didn't have my watercolors anymore. And then trying to find oil paint in Brazil, and then trying to find canvas in Turkey. I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah.
And so it was very inspirational. But then there was also this, like, kind of after 2 years, you know, I'm like, I need to be able to
Settle down.
actually, make
Yeah,
some art.
definitely. And I remember, I mean, when I met you, you were creating so much in your sketchbook. Like, your sketchbook was like, wow. Like, I feel like I got so inspired as an artist through the sketchbook that you had. Well, you had a few, and I feel like I want to talk a little bit about like how does your creative process interacts with your massive paintings, with your sketchbook, and you know, all these creations that you do. You fold, you cut, you do all these things like physically that you cannot do digital. But yeah, how does this like change your paintings?
You know, it's funny because when we met, I was in the middle of my travel, and being in Berlin was like the first time in ages that I'd had a real studio, but you only have it for a month. So there's still that feeling that it's not permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of my creative energy went into my sketchbook. And now that I'm stable again and I have a studio again, I don't actually work in my sketchbook so frequently.
Mm.
Um, I've been trying to recently push myself to do that, but it's like almost one or the other for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, your studio became your sketchbook, right? It seems like. And then now that you have this whole space, you know, like you could just like create there and really like be a tornado in it, basically. It makes, do you use like the iPad like to design and sketch, or you still do like more analog?
So I actually have been using my iPad a lot more recently, but that's because I was commissioned to do some like children's book illustration. And for things
Mm.
like that, it's just easier to, you know, change things and collaborate with other people. I hate working digitally. There's something that's so infinite about your options in it that is really difficult for me. Like, you can use any color that exists, any texture, you can layer whatever. It's just literally endless options. The only thing I have used it for with my, like, in collaboration with my personal art that I've found very helpful is that sometimes I get to a point with a painting where I don't actually know what I want to do with, like, how to finish it or what's not working.
Mm.
And taking a photo of the painting and then putting it in Procreate and drawing on top of it, or like filling colors in certain areas to kind of like almost sketchbook on top of an existing painting. That is helpful. It just hasn't become a habit yet.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Some people do really well with digital, and I'm jealous of them because I
Yeah.
can't quite figure it out.
Nice. I feel like there's something so beautiful, like there's infinite colors and stuff. I feel like sometimes when you have less materials, you become way more creative. Like you really
Yeah.
push it, you know. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I want to talk about, I remember so much, like all of your paintings, well, most of them, you started them with like a phrase or an emotion. How did this started?
When I was in France, I met an artist who said something to me that really stuck with me. He said, break the white. And it is my life mantra of like, there's something so scary about a blank piece of paper or a blank canvas.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to mess it up. And so when he said that, and I don't know, I kind of implemented it like just my life rule of just get a mark on the canvas, just draw something, write something, have faith in your abilities with the materials that nothing is permanent. But then the canvas is like already damaged, and then you become a lot more free. And those barriers of like, I don't want to mess it up kind of go away. Even like I've just walked on top of a canvas and gotten footprints on it, or like spilled something accidentally, and then suddenly it's not so precious.
Yeah.
And you can just like explode because trust yourself that you can cover it up or change it or evolve it into it. And I don't know, that's why I just kind of go for it.
Yeah. I feel like the blank canvas is like a scary thing for a lot of the artists out there.
It doesn't really go away. Not for all of us.
That's interesting to know. And I want to talk a little bit about your color palette. Is there like, I know you have been changing your color palette through seasons or collections, I guess, but is there a color palette that you really like? I remember you like a lot red. Red
Yeah,
is
well,
like your...
it's funny because my partner is also an artist, and for a lot of the time, like traveling and stuff, we were sharing, like when we did have studio space, or when we've been living together, we share a studio space. Now we have separate studios, but it's contagious. Our color palettes are contagious. So when we were living in Turkey, he started working in blue and orange. And then I started working in blue and orange. And then a friend of ours came to visit, and she started working in blue and orange. And we're both still in blue and orange. Or me more, I think. I'm still in blue and orange.
What color would you say is your go-to? Blue?
I mean, throughout my time as an artist, normally I would say red.
Yeah.
But now it's
The
pretty,
season
I
of
mean,
blue.
like, yeah, the season of blue and burnt sienna.
Nice. You're currently in Amsterdam. So
Yes.
how did you end up in Amsterdam? Like what brought you there?
So the short version is that we were trying to settle down in Turkey, in Istanbul. And an old friend of my partner's was coming to visit us. And 2 days before she came to stay with us, we found out our visa had been rejected. And we called like a bunch of different lawyers, and all of them had a different answer. Some of them said, oh, you can stay till the end of the month. Some of them said, oh, no, you should have been gone last week. And so all we knew was like, we got to get out because we don't know if we're really legally allowed to be here. And then our friend arrived, and we had a piece of paper taped to the wall with like a list of different countries that we were considering, of like where we could go because we didn't want to go back to the States. And she said, well, I live in Amsterdam, and you can come and stay at my place while you figure things out, or I can help you like move to Amsterdam. Like she knew a lawyer and knew kind of what the process was because she's also American. And so I'd never been to the Netherlands. We basically were like, okay, we're moving to Amsterdam because we gotta be gone. And she helped us set everything up.
Yeah, that's crazy. And how was the whole paperwork and everything, like as an artist?
It's rough. I think because I've done the visa stuff for France. I attempted to do it in Turkey, and then I've done it for Amsterdam or the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is the easiest. I mean, they make it very simple for Americans to come to the Netherlands for long term. So that was helpful. But this time I actually hired a lawyer, and that helped a lot because he just said, you need this, 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 and then he put it together, and it was not so bad, not compared to France. And Turkey was a whole nother story because it's all in Turkish, and that was very difficult.
Yeah, definitely, I bet. And now you have the visa, like the artist
and now
visa?
we have the visa. It's called the DAFT visa. It's the Dutch American Friendship Treaty. And it's basically an entrepreneurial visa. So you say, I'm self-employed. I'm bringing a business to the Netherlands. I will not be getting a job. And then you have to submit like a business proposal and all of that.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations,
Thank you.
I mean, because visas are quite, they could be rough, They take time, and, it's not like you just enter to the country and you can work there or sell your art there and stuff. What would you say it was like really hard moving to Amsterdam with your career and stuff? Like, I don't know, contacts, networking, or was it so easy? How did it feel like Amsterdam for you?
am very lucky and a very unusual case because our friend Alex Covert, who's also an amazing artist, she's the one who brought us here, and she's also from the United States, and she's been here, I think, like 5 years now. So she's already established a really awesome group of artist friends and connections, and she kind of brought me into all of that. So I didn't have to do the work of establishing my own friendships, my own network. She gave me just a really amazing sort of baseline to get started from. So I'm really lucky, and that's not a normal thing to be able to have access to in a new country. I think it's usually much more of a struggle.
Moving to Europe, do you feel like Europe compared to the US or America, it's really different in the art world? Art exhibitions, galleries, how do you feel like the culture of art compared to back home?
It's interesting because when you tell people you're an artist in the United States, the first question they ask is usually, how much do your paintings sell for? Or how much do you make? Where in Europe, the response has always been, what do you make? It's not about money so much. Like, obviously money is nice, but that attitude of like, you're only valid if you're making a certain amount of money, or I will only respect you as a real artist if you sell your paintings for $50,000 a pop or something. And that I find just like makes me feel good, makes me feel nice that people are just excited by the idea of art and want to know more and see more and don't care so much about the price. The downside is finding, like, you're never gonna find buyers who will spend as much as like the buyers in New York City. Like, that's maybe Paris, you can sell for high prices, but understanding how like to price paintings in a different country is something I'm still trying to figure out.
Pricing your own art, it's a struggle sometimes.
GPT is the best. You tell them how much you spent on materials, how big it was, how much time you spent on it, and it will spit out the numbers and do all the math. And then you could be like, nah, make it higher. And then they change the numbers a little. And then you can say, okay, now for this painting of this size, use the same to keep it consistent.
Nice. That's so interesting. I need to try that.
It helps.
No. Yeah, because sometimes I feel like you're like, no, I didn't spend that much time on it. But the time and the experience that you have as an artist, sometimes it's how much it's also valued, For example, you do a lot of faces and portraits and all these amazing pieces. And like, how long did it took you to have this certain style, to do it in 1 second? You know what I mean? It's really interesting also that.
Yeah. I'm still figuring it out.
Nice. But you're there, you're consistent, you're there, you're producing, being out there. Basically, that's so important. Yeah. And
Trying.
I was gonna trying. I was gonna ask your portraits, they all, like, how were they born? Like, because I know that most of them don't have the eyes, like you leave them like very to the imagination, I guess. But correct me if I'm wrong. But like, how did they were born, or like how did your style was like transformed?
A lot of it is just kind of going impulsively, and that's sort of just what came out. And a large part of it is also that like break the white mentality, where I just sort of scribble a lot impulsively, randomly, and I put things on the canvas, and then I cover them up, and then I put more things, and then I cover them up, and then I redraw parts of it. And so it's sort of just like a natural layering thing that then it just happened, which is not a very satisfying answer.
No, but it's fine.
Yeah, I know some people, like, I remember in university, people getting very stressed of like, oh, I need a style. I need to find my style. And I kind of think that just focusing on like allowing yourself to like get rid of anxiety with creating art and finding a sense of balance and freedom within the canvas, your style will come out naturally. And that's the way to do it versus where's my
Yeah, totally.
style?
Yeah, like trying to stress about it. Yeah, totally. And do you have like any current project that you're working on? Like, I don't know, an exhibition or a collaboration? Is there like a good project coming your way?
I've actually not been painting so much the past like month or so. Winter is difficult for me here. I'm an LA baby. I'm used to the sunlight, and I hate to admit that, but the winter is rough and it's very hard for me to find motivation. So I've actually been doing some experimenting with jewelry making and like carving wax and the lost
Mm.
wax method. Um, so
Yeah.
that's what I've been focusing on. And I'm trying to get back into painting. I'm working on some like boring art stuff where I'm very strongly considering going back to school starting next year. I'm applying for art school here to finish my degree.
No
Um,
way. Wow.
yeah, I'm going
So
back to
cool.
school. I'm really excited.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, it'll
Yeah.
be really cool. So I'm working on my portfolio, and I think I'm feeling the getting back into painting. I have a couple of unfinished paintings behind me that I should get back
Nice.
to.
They look amazing. And do you feel like Amsterdam has also changed your color palette? Maybe painting a little bit darker on the winter. And how does the weather, like, have you correlate that to your paintings or not much?
Haven't actually thought of it, but that's a really interesting thought. I think it's definitely influenced the technique. I've been a lot less loose and impulsive with my painting since I've been here.
Mm.
And there's been more of an enthusiasm to try and force myself to learn more traditional oil painting techniques and actually understand how the paint works and mediums and solvents and how to do it properly.
Mm.
And so I did spend like a year kind of going really tight and intricate with my oil painting. And now that was very inspired by the Dutch old masters and Rembrandt and going to the museums here and just
Yeah, of course.
studying.
Yeah.
Um, and now I'm bringing into balance my impulsive with all the new skills I've learned, which
Mm.
is interesting and definitely like it's going to be a stylistic step, evolution, change, the
Yeah.
merging of the two.
Yeah, definitely. I remember you were starting with this process of oil painting, like really perfect paintings, and I was like, "Look at this! Like this is like a different side that I haven't seen from you." And it was like so beautiful to see, not getting and not getting married with one style, I feel sometimes us as artists we have to, if you have an itch of doing jewelry, like go with your intuition. It's so cool trying also different styles could inspire you at the end.
I
Um,
think social media like pushes us to stay with our style because we're scared to change the profile or whatever, or at least
yeah,
for me.
yeah, definitely. And how do you typically connect with like galleries and curators? How has it been your journey working with like different galleries or like this approach of getting, your work out there?
I mean, I've met people through my work at the chateau, and so I did work with a gallery through there for a while. It was funny, in New York when I was living there, I met a gallerist. I walked out of my apartment and there was a guy selling some art on the side of the on the sidewalk. And I went up and introduced myself and I live right there, what's your name? And he explained that his studio was like in the basement below my apartment. And he introduced me to a gallerist in New York. So
Wow.
you kind of never know where your opportunities are going to come from. I've met people through like teachers from high school. I don't know, it's sort of a not so great thing to say maybe, but you should always treat everyone well, but you should always treat everyone well because you don't know who they know or where your opportunity is going to come from. It could be next month or it could be 5 years from then that they say, hey, I have a project.
Yeah, of
But
course.
presenting yourself
Yeah.
well to everyone is helpful.
Yeah, networking basically, right? If you didn't introduce yourself to this guy, maybe you wouldn't, get to know right? Guts to like go up to a random guy and just like talk.
Some street seller in New York City.
Yeah,
It's a risky one.
that's a risky one, definitely. That's crazy. It's super interesting how connections work also, yeah.
And
Definitely.
parties, honestly. Like
Mm,
finding the right parties. I'm not saying go out there and party, but in some communities, some of the best networking can happen in a chill party environment. It happens a lot,
yeah,
actually.
definitely. Definitely. And do you have a goal per year to do a certain amount of exhibitions, or do you plan your year a little bit like this year I want to do two, or you just go with intuition?
Don't do that. I should, but I don't. I think that I go more with my intuition and more sort of with collaboration with other artists.
Yeah.
Someone will say, "Oh, I'm planning to do this in this space. You should reach out to them too." Or, "Oh, I'm doing this project with these people. I'll give them your name." So there's a lot of sharing within my artist friends in terms of connections and opportunities. So it's a little bit unpredictable in that sense.
Oh yeah. So is there like some artistic directions, you want to experiment? Right now you're exploring a lot of like jewelry and stuff, but like do you want to go on in a specific line? And I mean this whole year you were doing oil painting, but is there something else that you want to explore and really like grind?
I mean, oil painting is my baby. I'm always going to come back to oil painting. No matter what direction I branch off in and explore, I always come back to oil painting. If I get into art school, I am very excited because they have all kinds of crazy facilities. And the two things that I haven't tried yet, metalworking, like
Mm-hmm.
proper big metalworking, and glass blowing, which I don't know if I'll be strong enough for, but I would like to try it. And they have the facilities for those two things. I don't know if there's anything like I particularly want to grind at that's new. I'm really enjoying the wax jewelry making stuff. I may try and learn how to do the casting, the metal casting myself, but I can't think of anything more than those.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, if you go back to school, you can definitely explore like glass blowing and casting, like metal
And it's a
work.
good school, so they have
Yeah.
really good equipment.
Yeah, that's so cool. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to see like what are like I feel like sometimes art is what we have inside. So beautiful to see like other artists and what they have inside. Right? Like I don't know, it's like super interesting. I was gonna ask also like your paintings, do you have like certain topics? I remember reading a bit of your story and you were going to this school and there was a lot of people struggling with like depression and or people around you, how did this affect your paintings and your work?
Yeah, so I went, my partner likes to call it X-Men school. I went to a very weird school where you had to be diagnosed as both learning disabled and gifted to get in. But what
Hmm.
ended up happening is they accepted a lot of kids who were very gifted, but more emotionally disabled. I mean, often they go hand in hand. And it was a small school and they needed the tuition money. And so they accepted a lot of kids that maybe shouldn't have been there and maybe
Mm.
needed more help than they could provide. And so there was a lot of emotionally volatile sort of situations around me, which when I explain to people, they're like, gosh, why did you stay there for 7 years? And honestly, it was very traumatic in a lot of ways, but the best education I could have ever had because I was just always I was trained almost or just around such damaged people, and it created this very empathetic like way of being for me, and I learned how to interact with a lot of different pretty crazy people. And I don't know, it got me more in touch with emotion in a different way than I think a lot of people are able to, and also see the
Mhm.
beauty in essentially being abnormal and being able to see the absolute passion that my classmates would have for different things and how every person has vastly different ways of communicating. I mean, we had I had a few classmates that were close to nonverbal. I had classmates who, I would have to talk out of suicide. You'd have like just all kinds of crazy situations, but you would learn, or I learned, to kind of see how they would communicate. And it doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's nonverbal uses sign language. It's much more understanding the nuances of each person's vocabulary and how they express themselves. And that is a huge thing that inspires me in my work, is sort of emotional communication between others, but also within ourselves. And it's honestly, I wouldn't have traded any of those experiences for the world, because I think it's made me a much better person for my art, but also just a better human for understanding and connecting with people.
Really beautiful answer. Yeah, that's so interesting. I bet, like, I don't know, from what you are saying, like, I bet you connected so much with emotions. Yeah. Would you say that your paintings are an expression of emotions, specifically emotions, intuitive feelings in the moment of your life?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, there is definitely a heavy lean towards emotion, but it is also inspired sort of situationally. So it may be, I don't define each painting very specifically in what it represents, because I believe that I might be painting something with a specific situation inspiring it, something I went through, something that I saw, and, that could be what it means for me. But I like to leave them open, so you could look at a painting of mine and say, oh, that painting reminds me of my parents or my partner, or, a fight I had with my sister. And it makes me feel this sort of way because it reminds me of that. And I like to leave that, because I believe that that also is the meaning of the painting. And if I say, oh, I painted this because I was thinking about that time that blah, blah, blah happened, then that's all you see.
Yeah. Leave the imagination of the spectator, basically, of the viewer.
Yeah.
And how does your days look like as a full-time artist? Is your routine, as a creator in general, like a normal day of Eleanor in the studio?
I have not ever really been so good at maintaining my own routine, staying up very late, sleeping very late. But recently, because winters are hard, I've become very strict with myself to wake up in the morning so that I can get as much daylight as possible hitting me.
Yeah.
So I'll wake up, around 8 or so, and usually start working by 10. And then kind of go with the flow. It changes a lot because all my friends are also artists in various forms and don't have real jobs. So we can kind of, meet for coffees or go, like I went to the museum today with a couple of friends. We can kind of keep it pretty flexible. So I can't legally work. Like I can't have a job, as I call it in the Netherlands. I can do freelance and consulting. So occasionally I will do work setting up gallery shows or being gallery assistant. Right now I'm doing children's book illustration, which just means that every day I try and sit down with my iPad and get some hours in on that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But it changes.
Some jobs here and there. Nice. That's super nice. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about the residencies. I remember you had a crazy story about one of your residencies. How many residencies have you been? I was checking your CV, your portfolio, and I was like, oh wow, she has been to so many. It seems like you're 50 years old.
I just dye my gray away.
Yeah.
I think I've been to 5. Have I been to 5? Serbia, Colombia, 4 or 5. And I may be going to another one. I have to solidify that, but I might be going to one in Cape Town, which could be fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah, my crazy residency story. I went to one in Colombia. I hesitate to call this an art residency. Actually, I don't like to call it an art residency. It's still on my CV, and I have struggled with the idea of deleting it or not. And the only reason I haven't deleted it is because I want people to ask me about it, because I want to tell them not to go there and not to support it. When my partner and I left New York to start traveling, we started in Colombia, and I found an art residency that looked really good on their website. It was like supposed to be kind of an eco art residency. They wanted to rebuild The environment because it used to be a coffee plantation. It's beautiful out in the middle of nature. Looked like it had great facilities for a painting studio, etc. It was only $600 a month, which for art residencies is pretty good. It included meals and accommodation and all of that. And we even did, like, they were sponsored by different grants and all this stuff. And we even had like a video interview with the guy who runs it. I looked him up. He was an artist from New York, like in his 60s or something. And I get there and it's all good, it's all fine. And it just gets a little bit weird. I went there kind of with the idea of like, oh, maybe I could integrate myself. I like working at art residencies. Maybe I can help them. I have experience. They're pretty new. Kind of start talking with the guy about it. Rick Dragon. I want you to know his name so you can know how awful he is.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And I don't know, there were lots of little signs that there was weirdness, weird attitudes about you get yelled at if you ate too much food or you wasted too much food. He yelled at my partner for using too much electricity for painting at night. They didn't really want to give us easels and things. There was weird energy about like having artists come and like pay to build houses on the property. And there was something in his eyes that was really scary. It's like dead eyes. And he really wanted me to stay. And it was definitely like kind of a residency designed to attract women, I think, in that like, oh, we're vegan, astrology, eco-friendly, just kind of like this weird thing. He was sleeping with a young woman in terms of age discrepancy, and she was an employee, and I don't know, there was just some oddness there. Or the only other person I knew who was like signing on to pay 50 grand to build a house on the property was also an older white American man who had had a series of quite young Colombian girlfriends. There was a lot of
Shady.
really scary situations. Yeah. And eventually, like a week in, I said to Max, I was like, we gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we were 3.5 hours away from like anything. We were all of the residents. I mean, we were taking 4-hour walks every day to go to town to get food because we weren't being fed enough, which is like scary. I mean, a couple of them almost fainted. He wouldn't call an ambulance for a guy because he didn't know who would pay for it when he like fell and gashed his head open. And we couldn't get out because Rick was the one who had the number for a car that would take us out. So we were all like, how do we leave? We're like in the middle of nowhere in Colombia with this guy. And eventually we all were like, oh, we want to go to Bogota for New Year's to go to a party, and then we'll come back. So we all pile into the car and go to Bogota and just never go back. And he wouldn't give us our money back or anything, but there were a lot of really scary situations. And for me, when I look at like the website, the grants, the interview, it looks like a very legitimate place. It looked more legitimate than some of the residencies I've gone to, and they were great. And, it's, I think, very important to be careful with these things.
Yeah, definitely. That's crazy. So you were there only a week?
Well, it took us, I was like, we need to get out after a week, but it took us 2 weeks to orchestrate getting out.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I was there 2 weeks.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was.
Did you, before going, did you contact some artists that have been there? A few months ago, someone contacted me from Barcelona, from the art residency, and they were like, oh, could you tell me how it was? And and I was like, this is such a great idea. Like,
yeah. I did. I don't remember specifically, but I know that I did because I've always done that. But the thing is, what I realized there is it was really culty. Like, there were some artists who didn't want to leave with us, and they were really buying into this like eco artist village kind of thing. So
yeah, like really cocoa washed already. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Wow. Wow. People that are listening, make your, investigation really well. That's so crazy. That's so, so
Especially if
crazy.
it's remote, and especially if they're the ones that are orchestrating transport and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really crazy. What has been the best residency you have ever been to? Like that you would recommend to other people to go there?
Chateau Orcevaux in France is
Wow.
like just it's the most amazing place. You never know who's going to be a part of your group. I mean, it's very social. You get your own studio. You get to meet artists and musicians and writers. It's just an amazing place for individual work and growth, but also inspiration and community. And they go above and beyond just to like get you what you need to help you in your creative journey. It's just phenomenal there.
That's amazing. So you would definitely go back, I assume, to that
Oh,
residency
anytime.
maybe? Yeah.
Anytime.
Nice. Is it in the city?
It's in
Or
it's in a chateau in like a remote part of France.
mm,
So it's like 3-ish hours, maybe 3.5 hours from Paris. But it's got this beautiful property with a lake and waterfalls and a river and an island and these beautiful like French bridges, and there's an orchard, and then it's just like surrounded by beautiful French farmland and countryside.
wow.
And it's like a 40-minute drive to a small city where they'll like take you there to go like get specific grocery shopping stuff if you want, your own
Yeah.
snackies and stuff. And there's also like, I think there's an art store, but also a lot of people will fly into Paris and like get their art supplies in Paris before going to the chateau,
Yeah.
so you can do that. Yeah,
That's
it's just
amazing.
like
And compared
so
compared to
amazing.
compared to Berlin, do you feel like working in the studio in the city was really different? Because this chateau was like remote, right? Like you were
Mhm.
away from the city. You were I guess like meeting artists inside the residency, but how was like Berlin and being in the city, like visiting different galleries, and how was it different? Like which one would you like the best as residency, I guess?
I think it depends on the individual and also the age. For me, Berlin would have been better when I was younger. I think the BAI is a great program, and it just felt a little bit more like an art school program.
Yeah.
And because it was in the city and you commuted to I feel like the artists didn't connect quite as much, where at the chateau, you have, maybe 20 or something other artists. It's been a while since I've been there, so it may have changed. But you
Yeah.
have like, let's say 20, 25 artists all living in the same buildings and in the same little tiny town. That's like, those are your people. You're eating dinner together. You're hanging out for a glass of wine together. You're waking up and
Yeah.
making coffee in the morning together. And so there's like more of, you feel like family. It's like summer
Mm,
camp. When you're a kid, you go to
yeah.
summer camp and you like are best friends after 3 days with people.
Yeah,
And Berlin
definitely.
was more like focus on studio. Here are some assignments. Here's some inspiration. We're going on a gallery field trip. And the chateau, there's a program, like they'll do different nights and events and stuff, and you can share writing or perform music, etc. But you can work in your studio when you want to. You can take a walk when you want to. It's much more free. Everything is optional. And you can use your time there more individually than this is kind of the structure for everybody.
Yeah, of course. That's
So
interesting.
it
Yeah, like a
depends.
like a summer camp, definitely. Connecting and getting to know other artists. Yeah. Do you plan to do an art residency in the future, or like do you have some projects in the far, far future? Where do you see yourself?
In the far future, I'm going to run my own art residence.
Yes,
That's
yes.
why I'm going to so many. I like to see all the different styles and see how things feel as like an artist myself.
Mhm.
Um, we'll see if that happens one day or not, but I take a lot of pleasure in teaching. I mean, I've thought about becoming a professor, which is part of why I'm finishing my degree, just so that if one day I decide I want to be a proper professor, I'm not, a million degrees behind. I'm just 1 or 2 degrees
Yeah.
behind doing that. But I think I would love to be a professor, but I think I would love even more to start my own sort of program in some form that's got less bureaucracy and more free form support for artists and whatever that means for them and on an individual basis, as opposed to like, I am teaching drawing 101 at 3 p.m. It's
Yeah, of
something a little bit
course.
more natural and supportive.
Mm.
But
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for this art residency. Heck yeah. I feel like in Berlin, in the art residency, you were always like grinding, you know. How do you find like motivation in the studio? Or like, do you feel these pauses are really important in your work? How do you balance that? Because I feel like sometimes as an artist, you know, it doesn't feel like a job and you love it so much and then you get lost, and then for me personally, and then I burn a little, you know, and then I take a step back. And how do you balance that, resting, taking time away from the studio and then coming back?
I've been struggling with that a bit. I'm a big believer in the idea that for artists, rest is just as much work as making the actual work. Because unlike going to maybe a normal job, we're quite emotional with it. So we also need to take time for ourselves to kind of rebalance. Recently, I've been struggling a lot with motivation, and I do think a lot of it has to do with the Amsterdam weather, just like not having sunlight, and seasonal
Yeah.
depression is a bit rough.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a big part of why I've been really into making my little wax jewelry things, because at the moment, painting on a big canvas is just a bit daunting. And actually, like a really good analogy for it is my sketchbooks. I have one sketchbook that's big, and then one teeny, teeny, tiny sketchbook.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when I work in my teeny tiny sketchbook, that's where I go when I'm feeling like very depleted and I just can't fathom working on something big, because it takes a lot less work to finish a page. And so you get the endorphin hit of completing something way more quickly, which can then bring the
Mm.
motivation back up. So working on small things where you can get those achievements and those like brain rewards helps, and then you can start like climbing back into the big projects. So I'm working on the climb back in right now with my little teeny
Yeah.
tiny projects, but it's
Yeah,
hard to figure
definitely.
out.
Finding the balance of the time away from the studio is as important as the time inside, like you said. It's crazy because we think as it, I need to work, you know, we see it as work inside the studio.
Hmm.
But I feel, you know, right now that you're working in something else or just like chilling, you know, just living in life, it's also kind of part of your artistic practice. You're kind of unconsciously working too, but on resting and giving the space to the studio somehow, you know?
I think for me, I'm trying to now find. So I made a change recently where my resting position was like curled up in a blanket on the couch or something. And there's a difference, and this is what I'm learning for myself in the recent weeks. There's a difference between resting and like just sort of being a lump. And there has to
Mm.
be kind of some activity within the resting. It doesn't mean a ton of work, but there has to be some sort of recalibration that's happening other than watching Netflix and doing nothing. So by moving my resting position from the couch to my desk, I'm still resting and I'm still watching Netflix. But while I'm doing that, I'm fidgeting with wax or I'm
Yeah.
working in my sketchbook. And so it's a somewhat productive rest that's
Yeah.
easy and low pressure of what I'm working on. It doesn't matter. And then easing into the intense, like real art practice,
Yeah,
balancing
definitely.
those two.
And do you have any dreams of doing a exhibition in certain city or something in a specific, or not really?
I mean, the cliche answer is Paris. I mean, that's how could I not? Paris and New York. I mean, I've done some shows in New York, but Like, there's a part of me that's still very into the bougie, pretentious art scene. And yes, I want my solo retrospective in New York City. And yes, I want my solo retrospective in Paris and Berlin. I want the top tier gallery shows where you show up in the fancy dress and everybody's pretentious and boring. And yeah, I want that.
We're, manifesting it. It's gonna happen. In a few years, we'll listen to this podcast and it will be, imagine. That's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your artistic process and stuff. And I wanted to ask, is there an advice for like other artists out there, or something that you wished you knew before?
I mean, break the white is a great thing to keep in your mind. I also like to tell myself that there are no mistakes, there are only layers, because that was always a big thing for me is, I got red in this area of white, but to have faith in your abilities and to layer and manipulate the mediums, it just might mean things change in that piece,
Yeah.
but it's not a mistake. I don't know if that's cliche or not, but it helps me a lot.
Definitely. Some good advices for younger artists or other artists out there. Definitely. And I'm doing this one question to all the artists that I am interviewing. What is something, it doesn't have to be art or some like creative work. It could be anything. What is something you cannot live long without in your life?
Something I can't live without?
You cannot go long without it.
I mean, at this point, my answers are very cliche, and that's coffee and a warm blanket. Because Amsterdam is so cold, and I can't find.
Nice. Perfect. Coffee and a blanket. That sounds amazing. We need some sun and heat. I'll send you some heat from Mexico. Some sun. I remember when we were in Berlin. And I remember it was the first few times that the sun, it was like so cold in September. And I was like, the sun, like in my head, I was just thinking like the sun doesn't do his job, like heating up. It's just there, but it's not heating like in Mexico.
Yeah, I saw the sun for the first time today in months.
No way. No way. At what time does it get like pitch black in Amsterdam right now?
Well, right now it's getting a little better. Like a week or two ago, the sun would rise at like 8:30 in the morning and it would set at 4:30 at night. But then when it is up, it's all cloudy and rainy.
Yeah. Like it doesn't seem like it's there. Yeah. Move to Mexico. What are you doing? To Barcelona or Lisboa or something. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Crazy. But well, thank you so much for this inspiration. I really hope, wishing you the best in your journey and your artistic journey. And thank you so much for sharing so much. I think art is very personal. And, when people share their art and talk about their art, it's like such a beautiful perspective, also of their personality and their art. But yeah, and thank you guys so much for tuning in to Color Me Crazy. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your friends. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Akai Street Art, for more inspiring conversations. And you'll find Eleanor's Instagram in the description. So don't forget to check out her work and follow her journey. Until next time, keep creating and stay inspired. I'll see you around. Ciao!